Hi, and welcome to That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What happened to the Flannan Isles Lightkeepers? Who was responsible for the Gardner Museum heist? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the human statues. A 15-year-old boy sat in his doctor's office for examination. He reported a personality change within the past 10 days after suffering an upper respiratory tract infection. He'd become extremely anxious and worried about his safety. 1 week later, he had spasmodic movements of the eyes and had developed resting tremors and slow movements in the upper limbs. He then noticed extreme daytime sleepiness, lethargy, and hiccuping that he couldn't stop. Upon examination, it was noted that he quickly fell asleep when he wasn't stimulated, and he yawned continuously. He made a complete recovery with no neurological or psychiatric symptoms at 1 year post-onset. Another 15-year-old boy visited his own doctor. He presented with acute paranoia. There had been no preceding infection, and after 3 days he developed a sudden increase in eye deviation, tongue contortion, and abnormal twisting of the limbs with retained awareness. The eye movements and twisting limbs occurred up to 10 times per day. Over the following 2 weeks, he became increasingly agitated, paranoid, and refused to or was unable to speak. He suffered from extreme limb twisting, blinking that he couldn't stop, restlessness, and compulsive touching of his body. 8 months into his illness, he remained unable to speak and agitated and required ongoing psychiatric care. Encephalitis lethargica, or sleepy sickness, not to be confused with the sleeping sickness caused by the tsetse fly, is a complex and not very well understood disease that took the world by storm in the early 1900s. In 1916, Dr. Konstantin von Economo was working at the Psychiatric Neurological Clinic of the University of Vienna and examined several patients that presented with unusual neurological symptoms. Although they all had different diagnoses, none of their symptoms fully matched to those diagnoses, and most of them presented with extreme lethargy. Mostly, he noted that the patients suffering from this were extremely sluggish, some being completely immobile but completely alive, almost like a living statue. He described the disease in a 1917 manuscript entitled Encephalitis lethargica. He considered the unique presentation of this disease to be its own disease. At the same time that Dr. von Economo was discovering encephalitis lethargica, French physician René Cruchet was noticing the same symptom set in a military hospital for neuropsychiatric disorders. Cruchet also believed this to be its own disease and published his findings within a few days of von Economo. Many more articles were published about encephalitis lethargica as the disease spread across Europe and eventually Asia and the Americas. During the course of the epidemic, over 9,000 papers were written about it. Millions of people eventually contracted encephalitis lethargica. People would be going about their normal lives and all of a sudden slow to a stop and be completely unable to move no matter what they had been doing prior. When they awoke, some of them would recall everything that had happened around them while they were in this sleep, aware but unable to move. There are 3 types of encephalitis lethargica which presented in wildly different ways. Although encephalitis lethargica wasn't discovered until 1917, in 1918, Dr. F. G. Cruikshank published an article entitled A Note on the History of Epidemic Encephalomyelitis, where he noted that similar diseases had been described at various times throughout the previous centuries. He described similar epidemics in 1529 England, 1597 Italy, 1672 to 1675 Germany, 1754 to 1757 Sweden, and 1890 to 1891 in Italy. What caused this epidemic? At one time it was believed that encephalitis lethargica was a post-viral condition caused by the 1918 influenza pandemic. However, upon closer look, this can't possibly be true. The influenza pandemic of 1918 occurred between the years 1918 and 1919, which was at least 2 years after von Economo wrote about the outbreak occurring in Vienna. More recent studies may have linked encephalitis lethargica to a streptococcal infection, although this still hasn't proven to be the case. To this day, it is unknown what causes someone to be healthy one day and suffering from encephalitis lethargica the next. By 1917, the encephalitis lethargica epidemic was ending in Vienna. However, outbreaks were noted in England and in France in 1918. By the end of that year, the disease was also noted in the US. In the 1920s, encephalitis lethargica was proliferating throughout North America and Europe. In 1923, the pandemic peaked in North America, causing nearly 2,000 deaths in the US. It then began disappearing quickly, being almost completely gone by 1930. To this day, there are occasional cases, but nothing rising to the pandemic levels reached between 1918 and 1923. Because of the time period, the fact that another epidemic was occurring at the same time, and the fact that encephalitis lethargica spanned the globe, the estimates of how many people suffered from the disease range greatly. One estimate is that over the 15-year course of the epidemic, over 1 million people in Europe suffered from encephalitis lethargica, with about 1/3 dying of the disease and only 20% making a full recovery. Those who never fully recovered commonly displayed strange, often impulsive behaviors for the rest of their lives. Some ended up with Parkinson's-like symptoms like tremors, slowed movements, and stiffness. Many of them became catatonic and fell into comas. Encephalitis lethargica could affect anyone, but young people between 15 and 35 were most likely to suffer from it. In the 1960s, a neurologist by the name of Dr. Oliver Sacks tried a medicine used to treat Parkinson's disease called L-DOPA on patients that were in comas due to encephalitis lethargica. Patients awoke from their comas. Some reported being aware of everything that had happened around them during their comas, while others reported being asleep the whole time. However, before long, the patients began experiencing terrible side effects from the medicine, and it was stopped. Dr. Sacks wrote a memoir about his experiences with this disease called Awakenings. This memoir was adapted into the 1990 film by the same name. Thankfully, now the cases are pretty rare. Encephalitis lethargica made a reoccurrence in 1993. Since then, there have been at least 20 other cases reported. What caused the encephalitis lethargica epidemic? Why did it almost disappear as quickly as it came? What made some people more susceptible to getting it than others? What do you think? Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.